Hi, welcome to First Chapter Friday. My name is Lucy, and the book that I am going to be reading the first chapter of today is called Freewater, and it is by Amina Luqman Dawson. Freewater is the story of a 12-year-old boy named Homer who, at the beginning of the book, is enslaved on a plantation called Sutherland Plantation. He and his sister Ada and his mother Rose are running away. They are heading north to escape slavery. And Homer has a friend named Anna who's also enslaved, and he wants to go back and get her. So Homer's mother, Rose, goes back to get Anna, and Homer and Ada get separated from her. She remains behind, and they end up in this swamp. So this book is fictional, but it is based on a real place, which was called the Great Dismal Swamp. And this swamp spanned at its peak from Virginia to North Carolina. So it was about 1,500 square miles. And this was a place where a lot of enslaved people had escaped, and they were living in this swamp because it seemed inhabitable. There were also people who lived in this swamp who'd been hired to work in the swamp to try and change it into something else, who then escaped and lived there. In this book, those people find Homer and Ada and lead them to their village in the swamp, and Homer and Ada sort of start to become part of the community there. But at the same time, Homer really misses his mother, and his mother is still enslaved, as is his friend Anna. So the story goes back and forth between bits on the plantation, both the enslaved people on the plantation and the enslavers. The daughter of the owner of the plantation named Nora, you get some chapters from her point of view. Otherwise, you get chapters from a varied point of view of people who live in the swamp and Homer. Homer's are the only chapters that are narrated in the first person. So it's really his story, but it is filled with a lot of really rich characters. I am now going to read actually the prologue and then the first chapter. The prologue's just one page, but I also want to read the first chapter on First Chapter Friday. Before the prologue starts, there's a page that says, "Some escaped the treacheries of enslavement by going north, but there were also those who ran away to the deep swamps and forests of the American South. There, in secret, they created free lives. This is a tale of what might have been." Prologue. Sansi had broken yet another rule, but she didn't care. It was night, and she was alone and on the forbidden edge. To make matters worse, despite her mother's numerous warnings, Sansi crossed right over, leaving behind the safety of her swamp island home. Just a peek, she thought. That's all she wanted. Then she'd go back. Down the muddy hillside she slid to a single tall tree. She climbed it, hopping from one craggy branch to the next, higher and higher. On the highest branch, moonlight hit Sansi and made her nutmeg skin shine silver. From her perch, she looked out. A sea of swamp mud, muck, and tangle lay before her. To her disappointment, fog rolled in from the east, covering her view like a white feather blanket. She strained to see beyond the muck and fog to the plantation lands. She was a free child of the swamp, and those lands were a mystery to her. It was a miracle her parents and the others had run from there and found this piece of elevated swampland, small and dry, their own secret island in an ocean of mud. Tales had spread among the swamp island children like herself about what lay in plantation lands. Two-headed men, turtles without shells, and skeletons that rose from the dead. Although she was 12 and almost grown, at least in her mind, Sansi still wasn't sure how much of it was true. But she did believe that dangers lay out there. As Sansi contemplated that danger, she took a walnut-shaped stone from her sack, placed it in the well of her sling, and spun it overhead. The whir of the leather sling whispered in the air like children sipping hot soup. Sip, sip, sip. She aimed toward the plantation lands. With a dream of adventure and a flick of her wrist, she released the sling and watched the stone soar high in the air, catch the moonlight, and disappear into the cauldron of fog below. The journey. Chapter 1. Homer. Dogs barking in the forest is extra scary. All their growling and yapping hits the trees and makes it sound like they're coming from every direction. Stokes had sent out the whole pack. He knew we'd try to escape, and his knowing had me to blame. But Ada didn't say that. Eyes wide open with fear, Ada's skinny arms held tight to a tree trunk. She was huffing and puffing to catch air. "Homer," she howled it in that way that said, "You're my big brother, now what?" I didn't have the breath nor heart to answer her. My mind was still on where we'd come from. Where were Mama and Anna? How could we keep going without them? Mama had gone back because of me, and now they were both gone. Homer, they're coming, said Ada. Paws crushed dead tree branches. It was enough to bring me back. Run, I said, but it was too late. In the moonlight, I spotted dog ears that pointed straight up. Funny thing was, I knew this dog. Even in the dark, I could see its face, big and round like one of Mama's iron pots in the big house kitchen. Stokes had me feed that big head when he was away watching the fields. I had to do it with my morning work, after collecting milk and eggs, but before watering and brushing down the horses. The dogs ate just about the same food rations they gave us. Lucky dogs. Yet they always stood there yapping, mean and angry. Ungrateful dogs. Now here, the same dog came running at me like it didn't even matter he'd had the food from my hand. We were strangers. I was the slave, and he was the dog sent to catch me. He sank his teeth into my ankle. Ada screamed. She didn't need to. I was so scared I didn't feel anything but the hot wet of his tongue. With my other foot, I kicked him in his head. He let go, whimpering, then backed away, maybe waiting for his friends before coming at me again. I grabbed Ada and we ran. There was water nearby. Mama had told us about it. If you don't see me come back, get to the river, she'd said. I didn't take much heed of her instructions at the time. We were going north, and Mama and Anna were coming along with us. Mama said there was a river, but she hadn't told us it wasn't a thing like the sleepy one we knew by Sutherland. We heard the water before we saw it. It was night, but this river was awake. We stood on the bank with barking behind us and roaring water in front. It sounds like a hungry monster. Ada likened everything to monsters and angels, but she was right. The water spilled downhill and grumbled like a belly waiting for food, its tongue licking this way and that as it turned and twisted toward the foggy swamp. Lord only knows what happened when it got there, but there was no time for worrying about that. If those dogs met us again, they weren't going to be any nicer. Ada, you know that dream you have about flying? I asked. Even with dogs on her heels, her face was kind of happy that I remembered her dream. She nodded. Well, now you get the chance to fly, like you did in that dream. We're going to fly right off this riverbank. Ada considered. Into the water? She asked. I nodded. The sound of dog paws hitting soft ground came closer. But Homer, I can't swim. She said it more with sadness than anything. That's all right, you can do it, I said. But Homer, you can't swim, she said. Before I had a chance to think about that fact, I grabbed Ada's hand and ran toward the riverbank and jumped. And that is the end of chapter 1, which is pretty action-packed. There are a number of scenes in this book that are filled with action, either at the plantation or in the swamp. They're really well written. It makes it exciting and fast-paced to read, but there are also really nice moments between the characters, and there are really important historical points about the South at this time and about the enslavement of people and what their life was actually like. And then there is this Great Dismal Swamp, which is a real place. If you read this book, which I recommend, I would also recommend going to the author's website because she has some great information there about the Great Dismal Swamp, and she has some footage from other swamps where communities of enslaved people escaped to. She also has a really wonderful afterword in the book, which explains some of the history around this place and some of the ways that it is still being studied to discover how people really lived there. That is Freewater by Amina Luqman Dawson. And as I said earlier, I highly recommend it. Thanks for joining me.